Listen closely, because what I'm about to tell you will make you want to call your lawyer, hug your real family, and maybe, just maybe, stop forgiving people who don't deserve it. Psychologists define forgiveness as a conscious, deliberate decision to release feelings of resentment, but what happens when that forgiveness becomes a weapon against you? My name is Compass, yes, that's my real name, and yes, my parents chose it because they said I'd always point them towards success. Ironic, considering they spent 34 years using me as their personal ATM while systematically destroying my sense of self. But before we get to the part where I finally fought back, where 131 witnesses watched my parents' complete destruction unfold in a Jacksonville courthouse, where their faces went from smug superiority to absolute terror, let me tell you how a person becomes so broken they don't even know they're worth saving. If this story resonates with you, please like and share it. Someone out there needs to hear that they're not alone, that toxic family members don't deserve infinite forgiveness just because they share your DNA. And comment below if you've ever had that moment where you realized, enough is enough. I grew up in Irvine, California, in what looked like a perfect suburban home. White picket fence, manicured lawn, 2 cars in the driveway. But narcissists lack empathy, and my parents, let's call them Margaret and Richard, wore their narcissism like designer clothing. The abuse started before I could even form memories. My earliest recollection? Being 4 years old, standing in our living room while Margaret screamed that I'd ruined her body, her career, her marriage, her life, all because I'd accidentally spilled juice on her laptop. Richard just sat there, reading his newspaper, occasionally nodding in agreement. The negative impact of narcissistic parents on children was consistent across studies, as research from 2023 confirms. I was living proof of every statistic. By age 7, I'd learned the rules. 1. Never speak unless spoken to. 2. Never show emotion, happiness made them suspicious, sadness made them angry. 3. Never succeed too much, it threatened them. 4. Never fail at all, it embarrassed them. 5. Always be available for their needs. 6. Never have needs of my own. Margaret had this special talent for destruction. Narcissistic parents may prioritize their needs and desires over their children's. They may expect constant attention and admiration from their children. She'd sign me up for activities, piano, ballet, soccer, then publicly humiliate me at every recital or game. Compass tries so hard, she'd tell the other parents, her voice dripping with false sympathy, but some children just aren't gifted. Richard's cruelty was more calculated. A narcissistic parent will often abuse the normal parental role, becoming overly possessive and controlling. This possessiveness weakens the child. He'd promise rewards for good grades, then find technicalities to avoid delivering. A 97% wasn't 100%. An A wasn't an A. Second place was first loser. But the real destruction came in private. They'd invented this game called Family Court where they'd put me on trial for imaginary crimes. Compass is accused of loving her teacher more than her mother, Margaret would announce. How does the defendant plead? No answer was right. Guilty meant punishment. Not guilty meant I was a liar, which meant worse punishment. I'd stand there, sometimes for hours, while they listed my failures, my inadequacies, the myriad ways I'd disappointed them. By 10, I'd developed a coping mechanism that would define the next 24 years of my life: constant forgiveness. Forgivers keep a right spirit. It is not God's will for us to live in a constant state of offense. I became an expert at immediately forgiving, immediately forgetting, immediately moving forward. Teachers noticed something was wrong. Mrs. Patterson, my 5th grade teacher, once kept me after class. Compass, honey, is everything okay at home? I smiled, I'd perfected that smile by then, and said, everything's perfect, Mrs. Patterson. My parents just want what's best for me. She looked unconvinced, but what could she do? There were no bruises, no obvious signs. Narcissistic parenting causes its own brand of trauma due to the psychological damage it inflicts, but psychological damage doesn't show up in school nurse examinations. The teenage years brought new torments. Margaret would go through my room daily, reading my diary aloud at dinner for Richard's entertainment. They'd critique my thoughts, my feelings, my dreams. Compass thinks she's in love with that boy from chemistry class, Margaret would announce, laughing. Should we tell her how pathetic she is, or let her figure it out herself? They sabotaged every friendship. If someone called, they'd tell them I didn't want to talk. If I was invited somewhere, they'd ground me at the last minute for infractions they'd invent on the spot. By 16, I'd stopped trying to have friends. It hurt less than constantly disappointing people. But here's where the story takes its first dark turn. On my 18th birthday, my grandmother, Margaret's mother, called me privately. She was dying, she said, and needed to tell me something important. "There's money," she whispered over the phone. "I've been saving for you since you were born. It's in a trust. Your parents don't know. It becomes yours at 35. Don't let them find out." She died 2 weeks later. At the funeral, Margaret cried dramatically, talking about how close they'd been, how devastated she was. That night, she went through my grandmother's house like a vulture, taking anything of value. I watched her pocket my grandmother's wedding ring, the one she'd told me she wanted me to have. I said nothing. I forgave. I always forgave. College should have been my escape, but Margaret and Richard had other plans. They'd filled out my applications, choosing a school 20 minutes from home. "So we can keep an eye on you," Richard explained. "Make sure you don't embarrass us." They'd show up randomly at my dorm, going through my things, interrogating my roommate. They'd call my professors, pretending to be concerned, planting seeds of doubt about my mental stability. "Compass has always been fragile," Margaret would say. "We just want to make sure she's handling the pressure." Children of narcissistic parents may find it difficult to create boundaries because their parents don't respect the boundaries the children set up. Every boundary I tried to establish was immediately violated. When I got a part-time job, they demanded my paychecks for safekeeping. When I opened my own bank account, they guilt-tripped me until I added them to it. After college, I got a job at a tech company in San Francisco. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Or so I thought. Margaret and Richard had opinions about everything: my apartment, too expensive; my clothes, too cheap; my work, not prestigious enough; my lack of a relationship, embarrassing for them. They'd call my boss, pretending to be clients, complaining about my work. They'd show up at office events, telling my coworkers embarrassing childhood stories they'd mostly invented. Compass wet the bed until she was 12, Margaret announced at one company picnic, laughing as my face burned. "We tried everything. It wasn't true, but who would believe me?" Gaslighting is a form of emotional abuse in which someone causes the victim to doubt their own understanding of reality. They were masters at it. But something interesting was happening. Despite their sabotage, I was good at my job. Really good. I had a talent for coding, for seeing patterns, for solving problems. My direct supervisor, Linda, saw through my parents' interference. She started routing my projects privately, keeping my successes quiet, protecting me from their destruction. Under Linda's mentorship, I developed an app. Nothing fancy, just a productivity tool for remote teams. But it worked. It really worked. A bigger company noticed, wanted to buy it. The offer was substantial. This is where I made my first rebellion, though they never knew it. Instead of selling outright, I negotiated for shares and a position at the acquiring company. The deal was worth $2 million in stock options that would vest over 5 years, plus a senior developer position with a $200,000 salary. I told my parents I'd sold the app for $50,000 and gotten a small promotion. Margaret scoffed. $50,000? That's all your little project was worth? How embarrassing. Richard's nephew just sold his company for $10 million. Richard added, "Well, not everyone can be successful. We'll help you manage that $50,000 so you don't waste it." I let them take $30,000. It was worth it to keep the rest secret. Meanwhile, my grandmother's trust was growing. I'd hired a private financial advisor, someone my parents couldn't trace, to check on it. What I discovered shocked me. My grandmother hadn't just left me a small inheritance. She'd been investing since before I was born. The trust was worth nearly $3 million and would be mine in just a few years. But that wasn't the only secret. Through my financial advisor, I learned something else. My parents had been stealing from me for years. They'd taken out credit cards in my name when I turned 18, maxing them out and paying just enough to keep them active. They'd used my social security number to get loans. They'd even been filing fraudulent tax returns, claiming deductions in my name. The total damage? Close to $500,000 in debt and fraud. Trade forgivingness is the disposition to forgive interpersonal transgressions over time and across situations. We define forgiveness as the replacement of negative unforgiving emotions with positive, other-oriented emotions. But I was beginning to realize that my constant forgiveness wasn't a virtue, it was a vulnerability they exploited. I started documenting everything. Every cruel word, every financial transaction, every act of sabotage. I recorded phone calls, legal in California if you're part of the conversation. I saved emails, texts, voicemails. I built a case file that would make any prosecutor weep. But I wasn't ready to use it. Not yet. I was still trapped in the cycle, still believing that maybe, somehow, they'd change. That if I was good enough, successful enough, forgiving enough, they'd finally love me. Then I met James. James was everything my parents would hate, an artist, a free spirit, someone who lived in a converted van and made beautiful furniture from reclaimed wood. He was also kind, genuine, and the first person who ever made me feel worthy of love. We met at a coffee shop where he was sketching. I was crying. Margaret had just called to tell me how I'd ruined her Mother's Day by not getting her an expensive enough gift. James offered me a napkin and a terrible joke that made me laugh despite myself. "I don't usually talk to crying women in coffee shops," he said, "but you look like you need either a hug or an alibi. I can provide both." We talked for hours. He didn't judge when I told him about my parents. He didn't try to fix anything. He just listened, and then he said something that changed everything. "You know, forgiveness without accountability isn't forgiveness. It's enablement. Forgiveness, as we relate to it, is letting the other person off the hook, but James helped me see that I wasn't forgiving, I was facilitating their abuse." We dated secretly for a year. It was the happiest year of my life. James taught me that love didn't require performance, that kindness wasn't transactional, that I had inherent worth beyond what I could provide to others. Of course, my parents found out. The confrontation came on Thanksgiving 2024. I told my parents I had to work, planning to spend the day with James instead. But Margaret had called my office, discovered the lie, and they'd ambushed me at James's van. The scene was ugly. Margaret called James every name imaginable: homeless, worthless, a parasite. Richard threatened to have him arrested for corrupting me. James stood there, calm, which only enraged them more. "This is who you choose over your family?" Margaret shrieked. "This vagrant? This nobody?" "He's not a nobody," I said quietly. "He's the only person who's ever actually loved me." The slap came so fast I didn't see it coming. Margaret had never hit me before, physical violence left evidence. But she was past caring. "You ungrateful bitch," she hissed. "After everything we've done for you. We gave you life. We gave you everything. You gave me trauma," I said, my cheek burning. "You gave me debt. You gave me years of therapy I can't afford because you stole my identity and ruined my credit." Richard laughed. Actually laughed. "Prove it," he said. "Who's going to believe you? We're respected members of the community. You're a mentally unstable woman living with a homeless man." That's when Margaret delivered the killing blow. "Your grandmother knew what you were. That's why she didn't leave you anything." We checked. There's no trust. There never was. She told us before she died, "You were too unstable to handle money." They were lying, but the cruelty of it, using my dead grandmother as a weapon, finally broke something in me. Or maybe it fixed something. Feelings of anger, resentment, and bitterness can be alleviated by forgiving others, but sometimes those feelings are appropriate. Sometimes they're protective. "Get out," I said. "Get out and never contact me again." Margaret's face went purple. "You can't dismiss us. We're your parents. We own you." "You own nothing," I said. "Leave, or I'm calling the police." Richard grabbed Margaret's arm. "Let her come crawling back," he said. "She always does." But I didn't. Not this time. The next 3 months were hell and heaven combined. Hell because my parents launched a full assault, calling my employer, my landlord, every friend they could find on social media. They filed a missing person report, claiming I'd been kidnapped by James. They tried to have me involuntarily committed, telling doctors I was having a psychotic break. But it was also heaven because I was free. Forgiveness brings the forgiver peace of mind and frees him or her from corrosive anger, but so does standing up for yourself. Linda, my boss, was incredible. She gave me paid leave to deal with the legal issues. James's family, a warm, chaotic group of artists and musicians, embraced me like I'd always belonged. For the first time, I experienced what family was supposed to feel like. I hired a lawyer with my secret savings. We sent a cease and desist letter. My parents ignored it. They showed up at my new apartment. I'd moved in with James, at my work, at the grocery store. They'd stand outside screaming about ungrateful children, about the Bible's commandments to honor thy father and mother. Then came February 2025. Two things happened simultaneously that changed everything. First, I turned 35. The trust was mine. All $3.2 million of it. Second, my parents made a fatal mistake. They broke into James's van while we were at a movie, trashing his artwork, stealing his tools, and, this was their biggest error, they left a note. This is what happens when you steal our daughter. Give her back, or next time it won't be your van we destroy. It was in Margaret's handwriting. I sat in my lawyer's office, the note in an evidence bag, my trust fund papers spread across the desk, and years of documentation in boxes around us. We can destroy them, my lawyer, Patricia, said simply. She was one of Jacksonville's most successful family law attorneys, recommended by Linda's husband who'd used her in his own family dispute. The fraud alone is federal prison time. The harassment, the breaking and entering, the threats, your parents are looking at serious consequences. But I wanted more than legal justice. I wanted them to feel what I'd felt, the complete dismantling of everything they thought they knew about themselves. We developed a three-pronged approach. Legal, file criminal charges for identity theft, fraud, harassment, and breaking and entering. File civil suits for emotional distress and financial damages. Financial, freeze all accounts connected to my SSN, audit every transaction they'd made in my name, and pursue full restitution plus damages. Social, expose their behavior to their community, their employers, their social circle, everyone who thought they were the perfect suburban couple with the ungrateful daughter. But the masterpiece of the plan was the timing. Margaret's 60th birthday was coming up in April. She'd planned a massive party, 200 guests, country club venue, the works. She'd been bragging about it on Facebook for months, calling it a celebration of a life well lived. We would serve them at the party. Patricia tried to talk me out of it. We can serve them privately. There's no need for public humiliation. They've humiliated me publicly for 34 years, I replied. They deserve to have their masks ripped off in front of everyone who enabled them. Research examining trait empathy found that state empathy mediates the connection between apology and forgiveness, but my parents had never apologized. They'd never shown empathy. They didn't deserve mine. I spent the next 2 months preparing. I hired a private investigator to document their current harassment. I worked with a forensic accountant to trace every penny they'd stolen. I compiled videos, recordings, emails, years of abuse, all organized and verified. But the most satisfying preparation was personal. I underwent therapy, real therapy, not the performative sessions my parents had forced me into as a child where they'd convinced therapists I was the problem. My therapist, Dr. Kim, specialized in narcissistic abuse recovery. You're not seeking revenge, she told me. You're seeking justice. There's a difference. Many who have been reared by a narcissist wonder about the nature of their injury. Several studies in 2023 shed light on this timely topic. Dr. Kim showed me those studies, helped me understand that my response wasn't abnormal, it was typical of someone breaking free from decades of abuse. I also did something else during those 2 months. I reached out to others my parents had hurt. Their employees who'd been belittled and cheated. Family members they'd borrowed money from and never repaid. Former friends they'd spread lies about. The stories were eerily similar. My parents were parasites, taking what they wanted and discarding people when they were no longer useful. But everyone had been too isolated, too ashamed, too afraid to speak up. Not anymore. We created a support group. 15 people who'd been victimized by Margaret and Richard. We met weekly, sharing stories, healing together, and preparing for what was coming. One member, my father's former business partner Steve, revealed something shocking. Richard had embezzled nearly $200,000 from their company before Steve discovered it and dissolved the partnership. He'd never pressed charges because Richard had threatened to ruin his reputation. I have all the evidence, Steve said. I've kept it for 10 years, hoping someday I'd have the courage to use it. How about April 20th? I suggested. Margaret's birthday party? He smiled. I already RSVP'd yes. April 20th, 2025. The Irvine Country Club was decorated in gold and white, Margaret's favorite colors. She'd spent $50,000 on this party, money I later learned she'd stolen from a home equity line of credit she'd fraudulently taken out on my grandmother's house, which she'd never actually sold after the funeral. I arrived with James, Patricia, 2 process servers, and 3 uniformed police officers. We waited in the parking lot until we got the signal from Steve, who was inside. The signal came at 7:45 p.m., right after the toast. Margaret was standing at the microphone, tearfully thanking everyone for coming, talking about family values and the importance of raising children right. Speaking of children, she said, her voice carrying across the room, I want to address the elephant in the room. Our daughter Compass isn't here tonight. She's chosen to abandon her family for, well, let's just say she's made poor choices. But Richard and I love her anyway, and our door is always open when she comes to her senses. That's when I walked in. The room went silent. 200 faces turned to stare. Margaret's expression went from shock to rage to a practiced smile in seconds. Compass, she exclaimed. You came. Everyone, my daughter is here. She started toward me, arms outstretched for the performance hug she'd give for the audience. That's when Patricia stepped forward. Margaret Henderson, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. You're being served. The process server handed her the papers. Then turned to Richard. Richard Henderson? You're being served. The police officer stepped forward. Mr. and Mrs. Henderson, you're under arrest for identity theft, fraud, and breaking and entering. The room exploded in gasps and whispers. Margaret's face had gone white. This is ridiculous, she shrieked. She's mentally ill. She's always been unstable. Tell them, Richard. But Richard was reading the papers, his face growing paler with each page. He saw the evidence we'd compiled, the forensic accounting, the federal charges. He knew they were finished. That's when Steve stood up. I'd like to add something, he said, pulling out his own envelope. Richard, remember that $200,000 you stole from our company? I'm finally pressing charges. Oh, and Margaret? I know about the house fraud. You used my name as a reference on that equity line. That's wire fraud. The dominoes started falling. My cousin Sarah stood up, they stole my inheritance from Grandma too. My Aunt Linda, they'd been claiming my mother on their taxes even though she lived with me. One by one, people stood up with their own stories. The room turned from a birthday celebration to an intervention, then to a public tribunal. Margaret tried to run. Literally tried to run in her designer heels and evening gown. A police officer stopped her at the door. You ungrateful bitch, she screamed at me as they cuffed her. I gave you life. I gave you everything. No, I said, calmly. You gave me trauma. You gave me debt. You gave me years of pain. But you also gave me strength. You taught me how to survive monsters. So thank you for that. As they led her away, she turned one last time. I'll never forgive you for this. Good, I replied. I don't want your forgiveness. I don't need it. I have something better, freedom. Richard said nothing as they arrested him. He just stared at me with this expression of bewilderment, like he couldn't understand how the puppet had cut its own strings. The news spread like wildfire. Suburban couple arrested at birthday party for years of fraud made local headlines. Someone had filmed the arrest and posted it on TikTok with the caption, Narcissistic parents get destroyed at country club skull. It went viral, 15 million views in 3 days. But the real fallout was just beginning. The investigation revealed the depth of their crimes. $487,000 in identity theft and credit fraud. $200,000 embezzled from Steve's company. $380,000 in tax fraud. $50,000 in home equity fraud. $147,000 stolen from other family members. Multiple counts of harassment, stalking, and breaking and entering. Total financial crimes, over $1.2 million. Their assets were frozen. The house was seized. Their car was repossessed. Margaret's precious country club membership was revoked. Richard was fired from his job when they discovered he'd been embezzling there too. But the social destruction was even more complete. Their friends, horrified by the revelations, distanced themselves immediately. Their church expelled them. The community organizations they'd belonged to banned them. The Reddit user u/toxic survivor 2023, later verified to be my cousin Sarah, posted our story on r/raised by narcissists. It became one of the top posts of all time, with thousands of comments from people sharing similar experiences. Reddit users share their experiences on r/amithholy to see if they are the problem, and the unanimous verdict was that I was not the asshole. The validation from strangers meant more than I expected. My parents tried to fight back. They hired a lawyer with money borrowed from Margaret's sister, who they'd later steal from too. They claimed I'd manipulated them, that I'd been planning this for years, that I was the real abuser. Then we played the recordings in court. Hundreds of hours of verbal abuse, financial manipulation, and explicit admissions of fraud. The judge's face grew darker with each recording. At one point, listening to Margaret describe how she'd convinced my elementary school teacher I was mentally deficient to explain my behavioral problems, which didn't exist, he had to call a recess. The criminal trial was swift. Richard pled guilty to avoid a longer sentence, 5 years federal prison, 3 years probation, full restitution. Margaret fought it and got 8 years, no possibility of early release. The civil trial was where I got my real justice. Not just financial, though the judgment was substantial, but emotional. I got to tell my story, all of it, in court. I got to submit my journals, my therapy records, the documentation of a lifetime of abuse. Children of narcissistic parents may often have mental health effects from this treatment, even into adulthood, and the judge recognized this. The judgment included not just restitution but damages for therapy, lost opportunities, and pain and suffering. Total judgment, $3.7 million. They appealed, of course. The appeal was denied. They appealed again. Denied again. Every appeal just added more legal fees to their debt. It's been 6 months since the country club incident. 6 months since I finally stopped forgiving people who didn't deserve forgiveness. My parents are in federal prison. They write me letters, Margaret's are manipulative pleas for forgiveness mixed with threats, Richard's are cold demands for money. I don't read them anymore. James built a beautiful box where we put them unopened. When it's full, we're going to have a bonfire. The trust money, combined with the restitution and my own savings, has given me financial freedom I never imagined. But more importantly, it's given me the resources to heal. Real therapy, not the performative kind. Support groups with other survivors. The ability to help others escape similar situations. I started a nonprofit called the Compass Foundation that helps adult children of narcissistic parents gain financial and legal independence. We've helped 47 people so far, including 3 who were in situations worse than mine. James and I bought a Real house, nothing fancy, but it's ours. We're getting married next month. My real family will be there, Linda, my former boss, Steve, Sarah, Dr. Kim, and all the people who stood by me when I finally stood up for myself. I'm also writing a book about my experience. A publisher reached out after the TikTok went viral. It's cathartic, putting it all down, examining how daughters of narcissistic parents often experience extreme self-criticism and how that can be overcome. The Jacksonville family court has become familiar territory as I help others navigate similar legal battles. Patricia has taken on several cases pro bono for people in our support group. But the biggest change is internal. Highly forgiving individuals have higher levels of existential well-being. People who forgive also experience less stress and less negative effect. But I've learned that forgiveness must be earned, not given freely to those who will weaponize it. I still believe in forgiveness, but now I believe in accountability first. I forgive myself for taking so long to fight back. I forgive the flying monkeys who enabled my parents without knowing the full story. I even forgive my parents, in a way, not for their sake, but for mine. Forgiving a person for their behavior is not the same thing as defending that behavior. You can forgive while understanding that the way they've treated you is wrong. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. It doesn't mean forgetting. And it certainly doesn't mean giving them another chance to hurt me. My parents will be released from prison eventually. They'll be in their late 60s, broke, friendless, and homeless. They've already sent messages through their lawyer asking if I'll help them when they get out. My answer was simple, no. No explanation. No justification. No jade, justify, argue, defend, explain, as we say in the support groups. Just no. Because that's what boundaries look like. That's what self-respect looks like. That's what healing looks like. I wrote my parents a letter recently. Not to send, I'll never send it, but for closure. Here's what it said. Dear Margaret and Richard. You called me compass because you said I'd point you toward success. You were right, but not in the way you imagined. I did lead you somewhere, to accountability. You taught me valuable lessons, though not the ones you intended. You taught me how to recognize evil by showing me its face every day. You taught me strength by forcing me to survive your weakness. You taught me the value of real love by showing me its absence. You taught me how not to parent by demonstrating every wrong way. You taught me that DNA doesn't make a family, choice does. I succeeded despite you, not because of you. Every achievement you tried to claim was mine alone. Every failure you blamed on me was yours. I know you'll never understand this, but I'm grateful. Grateful that your cruelty was so complete that I never had to wonder if I was doing the right thing by cutting you off. Grateful that you showed your true faces so clearly that no one could deny what you were. Grateful that you gave me such obvious villains to overcome. You were the dragons in my story. And I slayed you. I'm not your daughter anymore. I haven't been for a long time. I'm just compass now, pointing toward my own true north, which leads directly away from you. The person you tried to break. If you're reading this and seeing yourself in my story, know this, you deserve better. You deserve love that doesn't hurt, family that doesn't wound, forgiveness that isn't weaponized against you. Not my circus, not my monkeys, a Polish proverb that became my mantra. Your family's dysfunction is not your responsibility to fix. It took me 34 years to learn that some people don't deserve forgiveness. That family isn't sacred when it's poisonous. That walking away isn't giving up, it's growing up. My therapist, Dr. Kim, once told me something that changed my life. You can't heal in the same environment that made you sick. So I left. I fought. I won. And if I can do it, the girl who was trained from birth to be a doormat, the constant forgiver who believed she deserved abuse, then you can too. The cost of freedom from toxic family members isn't cheap. It cost me relationships with extended family who chose to believe my parents. It cost me sleepless nights wondering if I was the monster they said I was. It cost me the fantasy that one day they'd change. But it gave me so much more. Peace. Self-respect. Real love. A chosen family. The ability to help others. And most importantly, the knowledge that I am worthy of respect, kindness, and genuine love. My parents are serving their sentences now. But I've been released from mine. And that's the ultimate revenge, not their destruction, though that was satisfying, but my liberation. My happiness. My success. My life, lived fully and freely, without them. They thought I'd forgive them forever. They thought wrong. Sometimes, the best forgiveness is the one you never give.